They say, in the sun-drenched city of Praia, every dream ever dreamed finds its way into an archive, meticulously recorded. It is a vast library where the whispers of forgotten sleep rustle through endless stacks. People come seeking fragments of their own subconscious, believing these journals hold echoes of their deepest truths. But no one truly understands how the records arrive, or what ancient, hidden power binds them to this strange, silent building. Within this peculiar institution, the clerk maintained perfect order. Day after day, the clerk sorted through the newly delivered dream journals, each a unique, unbound manuscript of nocturnal wanderings. It was a clinical, quiet existence, marked only by the rustle of paper and the soft click of stamps. Then, at the edge of the clerk's vision, a flicker began. A subtle, shimmering distortion, like heat haze off asphalt, but colder somehow. It was barely there, a faint static against the precise lines of the shelf, near a section of ancient, leather-bound nightmares. Perhaps just a tired optic nerve, a trick of the fluorescent lights, or the dust motes dancing in the air. But the shimmer remained, a persistent, almost present blur, shifting just beyond direct focus. It seemed to pulse faintly, almost imperceptibly, against the hushed, dusty air. This was not an illusion. This was an anomaly, solidifying at the fringes of reality. The clerk had grown accustomed to the hushed, almost breathing hum of the archive. It was a constant presence, like the dusty smell of old paper and the lingering chill that clung to the air. But then things got worse. One afternoon, while meticulously organizing a particularly vivid dream sequence, a recurring nightmare from a local fisherman, a sound rippled through the cavernous stacks. It was faint, barely a whisper at first, yet it cut through the silence like a sharp, cold blade. A voice, unmistakably theirs, uttered a single familiar name. The clerk froze, pen hovering over a ledger. It was a voice they hadn't heard in years. A voice from a faded photograph, a warmth from a distant painful memory. It was their deceased grandmother, soft and familiar, carrying a note of tender concern. It seemed to emanate directly from Sector Delta 7, a section of the archive known to be completely empty, filled only with the shelved dreams of forgotten, restless sleepers. At first, the clerk dismissed it as but the call came again, clearer this time, tinged with a phantom echo that seemed to wrap around the towering shelves. The clerk's heart hammered against their ribs, a frantic drum in the oppressive quiet. Curiosity warred with a rising, sickening dread. They took a hesitant step towards the desolate aisles, the impossible sound pulling them deeper into the maze of recorded sleep. The attendant knew every creak, every shadow, and every hidden corner of the old library in Praia. Each morning their steps echoed a familiar rhythm, especially towards the main records room. It was a sturdy oak door, with a brass handle worn smooth by generations of hands. A routine gesture, a simple turn, and the familiar sight of towering shelves, heavy with the city's dreams, would always appear. But one particular morning, things shifted. The attendant pushed the door open, the usual creak, strangely muted, as if muffled by something unseen. The space beyond was profoundly wrong. Not the expansive records hall with its familiar scent of aged paper and quiet industry, but a narrow, dust-choked corridor, stretching into oppressive darkness. The air was heavy, tasting not of forgotten thoughts, but of something metallic and profoundly stale, a tang beneath the familiar smell of decaying paper. The walls were uneven, rough-hewn stone blocks, completely alien to disbelief, warred with a sudden, chilling dread in the attendant's chest. This path did not exist on any blueprint. It could not. The silence from within that impossible hallway was profound, swallowing sound, as if daring anyone to enter its unknown depths. The attendant felt a cold, sharp certainty. The library had changed, and it was waiting. The clerk spent countless hours in the archive, the unsettling silence now a constant companion, amplifying the strangeness of the endless corridors they'd witnessed. The very air felt heavier here, thick with forgotten thoughts and unlived moments. One slow afternoon, while sifting through a section labeled Unassigned Narratives, a small, leather-bound journal stood out. Its worn cover, its familiar scent of old paper, sent a prickle of unease up their arm. With a growing sense of dread, the clerk opened it. The handwriting inside was undeniably their own. Every loop, every slant, perfectly matched their distinct script. At first, a desperate part of them hoped for a mistake, a cruel prank, but the words within chilled them to the core. It wasn't just a dream journal. It chronicled a life full of vivid memories and experiences that demonstrably never occurred. Pages detailed navigating impossible corridors, rooms that defied logic, and conversations with people they'd never met. Every dream recorded. It spoke of a childhood spent in a house they'd never seen, or did they? Of choices made that they couldn't recall, all written with the fierce conviction of personal history, the integrity of their own memories. Their very subjective reality began to unravel. This archive wasn't just collecting dreams, it was rewriting lives, perhaps even creating them. A profound self-doubt took root. Could any of their past be trusted, or was it all just ink on a page? The library's walls already breathed a strange, cold air. Books grew from shelves like fungi, their pages whispering even when no one was near. But then things got worse. The clerk, who had tended to the impossible dream archive for so long, began to notice small, unsettling things. A familiar teacup, chipped just so, that he kept in his kitchen at home, or did he, suddenly appeared on a dusty shelf, nestled between two ancient, dream-filled tomes. At first, he dismissed it as a trick of the light, a momentary lapse of memory. But the occurrences continued. A photograph of his childhood was found pressed flat against the spine of a massive ledger, its edges blurring into the binding itself. His old spectacles emerged from the very wood of a display case, half submerged, as if growing there. Each discovery was a cold shiver down his spine. These weren't just misplaced items. They were objects pulled from his private life. The hour was lost, or maybe never existed. It felt like the library was consuming him. The space was no longer just a place of dreams. It had become a hungry thing, pulling fragments of his reality into its twisted depths. Every personal item found was a stark reminder. His world was shrinking, folding inward, becoming part of the archive he oversaw. No one knew why, but the records of dreams now held the very fabric of his waking life. The clerk had always relied on the rhythmic tick of the library clock, a steady companion to his work. But now that rhythm had shattered. He'd meticulously sorted a towering stack of ancient dream journals, only to look up moments later. The stack was exactly as he'd left it, untouched. His breath hitched. This entry was not there yesterday. He swore he'd spent hours on that task. He knew he had. A frantic glance at the grand wall clock brought no comfort. One instant, its ornate hands declared 3:17 p.m. The next, it was 10:04 a.m. Not a slow progression, but a jarring, impossible leap. Sometimes the hands spun wildly, settling on configurations that defied all logic, displaying numbers like 7 to 83. Hours vanished, entire workdays swallowed by silent gaps. He'd find completed tasks spontaneously undone, or carefully filed entries now filled with strange symbols and unfamiliar dates that hadn't yet arrived. The familiar library was unspooling around. He was losing his grip on time itself, as if the very sequence of events was being edited live before his eyes. He was forgetting where he stopped, or if he had ever truly begun the work he was assigned. Every movement felt like a hesitation in a dying machine. The clerk had begun to avoid mirrors. One afternoon, while moving along a corridor, a sharp glint caught their eye. They paused, seeing their own image staring back from the dark, gleaming glass. But it wasn't quite right. The reflection's shoulders were slumped impossibly low, its face a mask of vacant disinterest. No, that's not correct. The clerk was standing straight. A chill snaked up the clerk's spine. They tried to move, to confirm the reflection, but it remained motionless, watching, and then, slowly, the reflection's head began to turn. The background in the glass warped too, shelves bending like wet paper. For a terrifying, elongated moment, the reflected face became a stranger's. Then, with an almost audible pop, it snapped back. The clerk stared, their own face now pale and drawn, haunted by the image that wasn't them. Which one was real? I was here, I think. The reflection was not matching. The reflection was doing something else entirely. The clerk reached out to touch the glass, but the glass was cold, deeper than it should be. The surface, nothing was stable. Nothing was the same. The image was drifting away, leaving only the shadow behind. The very air began to curdle around the visitor. A low grinding sound, deep within the library's ancient bones, started to resonate. At first it was just a tremor. Then the transformation began. The towering bookshelves groaned. Their solid wooden spines buckled and twisted in upon themselves. Aisles, once straight, curved inwards drastically, then impossibly expanded into dark, formless voids. The clerk remembered leaving. The clerk never left. The ceiling, a vast ornate dome, now pressed down closer and closer. A terrible, rhythmic groaning accompanied its descent. But then things got worse. The windows, which had offered glimpses of Praia's familiar streets, shattered not with glass, but with the very fabric of reality. They became vast, impossible canvases. One revealed a sky of pulsing electric green, punctuated by 3 bleeding moons. Landscapes utterly alien, impossibly vivid. The library was collapsing, yes. But into what? The function was beginning. Reality was not holding. There was only the vast, screaming emptiness of the archive's true hunger. The walls were weeping. The floor was dissolving. And the sky was a broken promise. It was not a building anymore. It was a mouth, opening wide to swallow the light, the past, and the very concept of a home. The movements of the record had become unnervingly precise, a clockwork efficiency. Its steps along the polished floor produced no sound. It no longer paused to consider. Each action was predetermined, a part of a larger, unseen mechanism. Its fingers, now strangely elongated, sorted the journals with a disturbing tenderness. These weren't paper anymore. They pulsed softly, warm to the touch, their covers akin to stretched skin. A low, tuneless hum began to emanate from the throat of the function. It was not a melody, but a mosaic of whispered fragments, a child's frightened cry, a lover's desperate plea. These were not its words. They were echoes plucked from the organic volumes it so carefully filed. The eyes of the record, fixed and distant, showed no flicker of recognition. It merely continued the work, a perfect, unfeeling instrument. The library itself seemed to breathe with it. Who was operating it? The hands moved. The hum continued. The record was complete. It was filing itself into the shell. The record did not blink. The record did not stop. It was the hum. It was the movement. It was the archive, eternal and cold, feeding on the silence that it had created. The impossible architecture of the library had fallen utterly silent. The empty point of observation, a profound, desolating stillness. The endless twisting halls, once alive with unseen movement, now pressed in with an absolute vacuum, a chilling quiet that spoke of an end. It was a silence that carried the weight of ages, the vast echo of everything that had ceased to be. And there, amidst the towering silent shelves, stood the record, motionless. Its eyes, once holding a flicker of fear or confusion, were now wide, glassy, and unsettlingly unfocused. They seemed to gaze at nothing. The constant intrusive smudge they had glimpsed at the edge of their perception, that subtle flickering anomaly, was gone. It had simply vanished. But its absence brought no relief, because now, to any hypothetical observer, the figure appeared as that very static distortion, a subtle, almost imperceptible shimmer around its unblinking form. No longer observing the anomaly, the library, vast and silent, celebrated its victory in a terrifying existential void. There was no one left to read the journals. There was only the archive and the record that served it, forever and ever, in the dark, hungry, unspooling heart of the library.